Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show on Mile High Sports. It's Sandy and Shawn. That is Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. Thank you for joining us. We reach a point in the sports calendar in which things slow down quite a bit. The NFL is a bit away. The Stanley Cup has wrapped up. We'll talk about both of those. We'll start, Sandy, with the Denver Broncos as the NFL becomes next up in the menu of sports for every calendar year, even though it's a ways away, about a month still until training camp picks up in earnest. Articles are going across the board talking about the ideas, previews, and ways to look at each of these teams in order. Frank Schwab of Yahoo Sports put together an interesting piece a couple of days ago over the weekend because they're counting down from 32. The Broncos are a lot closer to 32 than they are to number one. In this case, they are 30. And it was interesting to see what Frank, who's covered the NFL for a really long time, talked about it. And a lot of it focused on Sean Payton and the idea that because Sean Payton really didn't have a bunch of interest in working with Russell Wilson, now the Broncos have a turnover situation in which now for the next couple of years, due to the dead cap money they have, Bob called it the NFL's worst long-term situation. Now, long-term in the NFL only means a couple of things, right? Because smart drafting, smart signing can turn it around quickly. But I don't know if that's not necessarily the case, something that you have alluded to. We've talked about this being a rebuild. It is a rebuild. Whether the Broncos choose to call it a rebuild or not, that's irrelevant. It is. And Bo Nix is at the head of it. But at the same time, the financial realities and something that you've discussed, the top-end talent is dramatically lacking. And until proven otherwise, Bo Nix can't be considered part of that either.
No, hasn't played a game, hasn't started a game. We think he will on opening day, health permitting. A reason to expect that he would be seriously challenged by either Jarrett Stidham or Zach Wilson, as we've outlined for the past few weeks, perhaps past few months, ever since Wilson was acquired from the New York Jets. But yes, an absence of top-end talent, explosiveness, game-changing players with respect to offense and defense, playmakers, pure and simple. They are, maybe with the exception of New England in the AFC and Carolina in the NFC, almost completely devoid of proven playmakers.
You want to guess who's 31 and 32 in Yahoo Sports Preview? New England Patriots and the Carolina Panthers. Patriots at 31, Panthers at 32. And for the same reason. As a matter of fact, when you talked about playmakers, they listed two, Pat Surtain, Cortland Sutton, and that's it.
And that's stretching it, to be honest.
Right.
Because, yes, Sutton had 10 touchdown receptions last year, but his touchdown reception totals in previous years were quite modest, even in 2019, right? His best year, 1,000 yards. He did not have as many as 10 touchdown receptions for that season, his best year. And Surtain, for reasons we've debated off and on for months, if not years, is probably not going to pick off a league-leading number of passes anytime soon.
Right. And in Sutton's case, we're not even sure if he's going to be on the team when things roll around because we know there's a contract dispute going on that isn't going to probably resolve itself anytime soon. Interesting observations and to an extent criticism, because at one point points out that Sean Payton didn't seem all that interested in working with Russell Wilson. If you put the puzzle pieces together, it was only a couple months into the season when Wilson was approached by the Denver Broncos to renegotiate his deal to remove the injury guarantee. Now, the Broncos don't dispute that happened. They dispute the characterization of it here and there. And Sean Payton has said top to bottom, I didn't know anything about it. If you believe it, that, we have the proverbial bridge in Brooklyn to sell you cheap. But if that's the case, and that Sean Payton hopped in, realized never really wanted Russell Wilson, which you and I both believe, I think in general is correct, then the die was cast here, because the only way out of it is what the Broncos have done, and that is take a dead cap hit of more than double the worst ever that a team has ever absorbed. And that was the Atlanta Falcons with moving on from Matt Ryan at $40 million. The Broncos will Move on from $85 million in Russell Wilson, 53 of it this year, 53 million of it to watch him play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that made the playoffs last year. The Denver Broncos did not. And remember, on top of that, we're just talking about the dead cap money. Think about how disastrous this has really been. Ignore the players that Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, Drew Lock that were traded originally for Russell Wilson. To acquire Russell Wilson and Sean Payton, 5 first and second round selections. Those are gone. Those would be players who should be playmakers, who would be probably parts of a roster core the Broncos are building. It's one thing to have that happen and then have the people you acquire make major impacts quickly. It's another when you trade 3 players, the picks for Russell Wilson, move on from him, and take the biggest dead cap hit in the history of the NFL. That's an absolute disaster from beginning to end, and you couldn't even fix it quickly because Sean Payton cost you a couple picks too.
Yes. We've talked about this. They've had a massive turnover when it comes to quarterbacks and head coaches, not to mention defensive coordinators and position coaches over the past 8 years, 9 years, if you want to talk about the first year of Gary Kubiak. No coach since John Fox has stayed here longer than 3 years. And the only reason that Vic Fangio stayed for a 3rd year was because the Broncos had an ownership vacancy, essentially at the time, that did not allow for the firing of Vic Fangio and or the hiring of Vic Fangio's replacement. The Broncos were essentially in limbo during the 2021 season. 2022, they had new ownership. Nathaniel Hackett had been wink hired prior to the official takeover. The new owners, again, wink. The new owners knew all about Nathaniel Hackett's hiring and presumably approved of it, just as prior to their being officially placed in the position of ownership, the Russell Wilson transaction was consummated. The trade that might have been the worst in the history of this franchise. So they lack salary cap space. They lack a proven quarterback. And in recent years, certainly, they have been doing without a suitable number of draft picks.
Right. Many of whom should be plugged, in theory.
You talk about
starters,
the triple crown of dysfunction.
Right.
That's where the Broncos have been for at least the last 3 or 4 years.
And you don't get out of it quickly. And they took a little bit of the look of where the promise might be. And they looked at the running back core. And here's what they talked about in the running back side. Scott Pianowski said Javonte Williams had a major knee injury 2 years ago, never got in gear, stuck at 3.6 yards per carry. Sophomore Julian McLaughlin is more explosive, but probably has a capped workload given his 5'7", 187-pound frame. Rookie Audric Estime could see some of the inside work, but you don't take a plodding 5th-round rookie who ran a 4.71 40 at the combine to take the league by storm. And if Samaje Perine even makes the team, he'll likely be the trusted man in hurry-up packages, in part because of his pass blocking skills. There isn't a proactive pick in this motley crew. So while there are interesting talents, it's true. You look at it and you just kind of hope, okay, could Troy Franklin be really good as a wide receiver? Sure. Could Josh Reynolds maybe exceed what he's done as a number 2? I guess. But could Lucas Kroll really become a caliber of tight end that you can count starting in the AFC West? I suppose. But you're really looking at this and needing so many things to hit right. And then they point out correctly, the Broncos finished 19th in offensive DVOA, defensive value above average, and 30th in defensive DVOA, allowing a 98 passer rating, 3rd worst in the league.
Right.
And their running game was even worse. They were 0.3 yards per carry worse than any other team in the NFL. Terrible. Historically bad until Justin Simmons returned, but Justin Simmons apparently something of a cap casualty as the Broncos just cut him. So when everyone's looking at the idea of it's Nicks and Peyton and the running backs and the wide receivers and the tight end, the defense itself is a disaster. And when you're looking, did they add playmakers there? No, not really. Maybe Jonah Ellis of Utah will be an exciting addition, but we're talking about a 3rd-round guy. He's not going to all of a sudden become Von Miller. So if it's this bad, the point that I think was fascinating that Frank Schwab wrote about today in Yahoo Sports, and you can check it out over at Yahoo Sports, is that he argued that if Sean Payton wasn't as good a football coach, an X's and O's guy as he is, this would probably be below New England, below Carolina. They would probably be the worst team in the NFL simply because you look at the roster and go, how are these guys going to win enough games? But he actually believes that Payton's coaching acumen is going to make them better than that. So are the Broncos going in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Yes, a little bit of both. Perhaps with respect to the coaching, yeah, I think they've got a better coach here right now than they've had at any point since Gary Kubiak was head coach. And that covers a lot of ground, at least a lot of years and a fair number of coaches.
Right.
That's been part of the problem, as we've suggested. But is he a better coach than the current head coach at Carolina, the current head coach at New England? Yeah, I think he's more proven. The current head coach at New England's first-time head coach. Carolina, you have kind of a it's interesting. Carolina and the Broncos played for the Super Bowl following the 2015 season. Largely, they have gone in the same direction since, straight down. And they have some of the same problems. They have an owner who loves to change coaches. At the drop of a hat, he'll do it. He thinks he knows more about football than the people he hires. I don't know if that's still true. Maybe he's reformed. We have no way of knowing. That's one distinction that I think the Broncos have over the Patriots and Carolina. The Patriots and Carolina have two owners. One, at least, has been associated with half a dozen Super Bowl wins. But both think they know quite a bit. I don't know that there's any pretense being made here that the ownership group is doing anything except being educated.
Yeah, and to their credit.
By Sean Payton
to their credit.
and or others. Probably mostly from Sean Payton. So, yes, in some ways they're going in the right direction. They have a well-funded ownership group, a highly capitalized ownership group that could have paid, I don't know, half again as much for this team as they actually paid.
And
they could have afforded
probably gotten
maybe twice as much.
Value out
maybe
of it
twice as
still.
much. Probably still gotten some value. They do have a Super Bowl winning head coach, although the Super Bowl he won was 15 years ago.
Right.
He still is a proven
stays
winner.
on the resume, right?
Right. So in that sense, they're going in the right direction. It's hard to say that competitively they will be better than they were last year, and they were still a losing team last year at 8-9. It is hard to make that case. So are they treading in the waters of mediocrity? I think that would be a fair assessment. Are they one of the bottom 10 teams in the NFL as presently constituted? Yes, clearly. Are they one of the 5 worst on paper? Yes. On the field, we'll see. I mean, there were times last year where they looked like a playoff team during that winning streak in mid-season that actually began right before the trade deadline with a somewhat historical win over the Kansas City Chiefs, since the Broncos hadn't beaten the Chiefs in, 16 games, was it?
It was a while.
Over 8 seasons.
And then that's part of the equation, too. At the end, Schwab points out it's hard to predict that any team coached by Sean Payton to win 2 or 3 games in the season. He's just too good for that to happen.
Right.
But pointed out, Payton should keep the Broncos out of the first pick in the draft. Maybe that's not the best news, but it's also hard to project some magical 5-game winning streak like last season.
Right.
And brings up maybe the most important point, maybe a little nerve-wracking for Broncos fans to hear. One of the biggest challenges for this team is their goals over the season has to be to find out what they've got in Bo Nix.
Of course.
Because if they're not
that's the
good,
primary objective.
Because if they're not good, you're going to be in the top 5 in a position to pick a quarterback to replace him immediately. And that could perpetuate the challenges. So it's one of the reasons Nix has to get in, has to play. Suspect the Broncos.
Sean Payton has spent a lot of capital, and I don't mean literally money. I mean capital in terms of his reputation on Bo Nix.
Well, we'll find out in a little under a month. The Broncos will report for training camp. We'll see how that all goes together. In the meanwhile, it is hot. It is sunny. It is beautiful. It is an opportunity to go out, play a little golf, and we've got just a spot for you.
Well, it's time to get out and play some golf right here in the city of Denver, and they have the perfect golf pass for you, whether you're just getting started or you played for a while. The practice and play pass is for those new to the game, to practice what they've learned, transition it onto the golf course. The Learn and Play Pass 1.0 is geared toward adult beginners, people who've never held a club, players looking to advance their game. Or if you've been playing for a while, maybe a better option is Learn and Play Pass 2.0, which is designed to be flexible for intermediate players looking to improve and fine-tune their game. If you're just looking to have fun, the Friends and Family Pass lets you play mini golf or hit the driving range, and you can bring up to 3 guests with you every time. So with unique courses throughout the city, 8 in all, opportunities for all skill levels, Denver Golf is perfect for everyone. Learn more about everything Denver Golf has to offer by visiting cityofdenvergolf.com. Come home to play, because Denver Golf is your neighborhood course.
The Colorado Avalanche didn't waste much time after the Stanley Cup Finals finish last night with the Florida Panthers winning. More on that in a little bit. The Avalanche get good news as they re-signed restricted free agent center Casey Mittelstadt to a 3-year deal worth $5.75 million per season, per the Athletics' Pierre LeBrun, who is definitely in tune with such things. Not a shock that the Avs got this done when he was acquired with that 1-for-1 trade, a rare deal nowadays, with the Buffalo Sabres for Bo Byron.
Real hockey trade.
Yeah, a genuine. We'll trade you this guy for this guy. And it worked out for both teams.
Young guys,
frankly.
Both young, one a centerman.
Both are better off in their new digs, so congratulations there. But there was never a question the Avalanche would re-sign Mittelstadt. You don't trade for a restricted free agent unless you have a pretty good idea what they're going to want, what they're going to need, and whether you can re-sign them. So they get the Mittelstadt deal done, 3 years, 5.75 per. And after a bit of a settling in period with the Avs, 10 points in the 18 regular season games he had with the Avs, got a little bit better statistically, 9 points in 11 playoff games. But when you think about the fact that it was his first playoff experience and the intensity of the playoffs in general, 9 points in 11 games in the playoffs is a lot better than 10 points in 18 regular season games. Mittelstadt improved week by week with the Avalanche and looks as if he's ready to solve that number 2 center problem that has been a problem for the Avs for years. It was just briefly solved by Nazem Kadri.
Yeah, for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was only in the last year that Kadri elevated his numbers well beyond what he's averaged on a yearly basis, both with Toronto and the Avalanche. And that was in 2022. He had 87 points that year. That is way out of line with what he had customarily produced, which is more or less 60 points.
And before or
right around 60, low 60s on average for his career. And that's why the Avalanche weren't going to give him the kind of contract that, Mikko Rantanen has signed, $9 million a year. Even $8 million, $7 million for that matter, was a little rich for the Avalanche blood. Easy in hindsight to go back and say, well, they should have let Nichushkin go and kept Kadri. But on the other hand, Kadri went to Calgary. Calgary has some talent. In both years, Kadri has played well, but in both years, Calgary has missed the playoffs. And the Stanley Cup playoffs are hard for a team with Calgary's personnel to miss in consecutive years. I mean, you still got half the teams in the NHL to make the playoffs. 16 make it, 16 don't. And for Calgary to have missed the last 2 years is not an indictment against Kadri, but it does show that, the numbers suggest that if you're just looking at numbers, the Avalanche got from JT Compher about the same level
Right.
of production as the Flames got a year ago from Kadri. This past season, obviously, that wasn't the case, although I think Mittelstadt shows signs of being not only a temporary fix and a plugging of the hole, but someone who for the next 8-9 years could conceivably be a perfectly acceptable number 2 center in the league. So that is certainly good news for the Avalanche. And, you can't take production for granted, particularly in the playoffs. And we will talk more about this later. But could anyone have imagined that 5 points from tying the all-time record for points in the playoffs, Connor McDavid would play 2 games, Game 6 and Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, without scoring a goal or registering a single assist? Leon Draisaitl, proven 100-point scorer in the regular season, had no goals in the Stanley Cup Final. He's the number 2 center. He's the best number 2 center in the league, even as at times he is put up on the top line with McDavid and Hyman. He is the number 2 center. He had no goals. Can you imagine if over the course of either series the Avalanche played this year in the playoffs, Mittelstadt had not registered a goal? Can you imagine the hue and cry over how the Avalanche tried to pull a fast one by pretending that Mittelstadt in any way, shape, or form could replace Kadri? So I'm just saying the production that Mittelstadt gave you in the playoffs should not be taken for granted.
No, and I thought he looked better almost game by game.
And 2 good defensive teams, by the way.
Right.
A team that actually, in Winnipeg in the first round, gave up fewer goals this year than the champion Florida Panthers gave up.
Mittelstadt won't turn 26 until roughly Thanksgiving, the 8th overall pick of the 2017 draft, the gifted passing you already saw on display, and now will be part of the Avalanche for the next 3 seasons. Good news for the Avs, by the way. The NHL draft thing it goes quickly here. The final was last night. The draft will be Friday. The Avalanche picked 24th in that. The next thing we expect to hear from the Avalanche, what do you think comes first? Someone selected 24th or Jonathan Drouin's new contract?
Good question. I've heard speculation that Drouin could be in line. And remember, he's unrestricted.
Correct.
Mittelstadt, who is restricted. That Drouin could be in line for a raise that would be worth roughly 6 times what he made this past year. A little bit less than that. $4.7 million a year. My sense is if there's ever going to be a hometown discount for somebody, it might exist with Drouin, whose advantage in staying here would lie in the fact that it's a pretty good chance he'd be playing again next year, quite a bit with Nathan MacKinnon. And playing with Nathan MacKinnon is certainly good for your numbers. So would he accept 4-4-1, 4-2 rather than 4-7 to stay here and play with MacKinnon? I suspect he might. And I think that would be a reasonable contract, somewhere in that $3.5 to $4.1, $4.2 million range. And again, there are different ways around these things. You can lengthen the contract. It all counts against the cap,
right?
Of course, but there's certain things you can do when it comes to contracts that make it team friendly. And if you want to give Drouin, who's still in his 20s, I believe,
just barely,
not mistaken,
but yeah, 29,
but give him a year or 2 at $8 million. Okay. For 2 years at 8, and give him a chance to test the market in a couple of years when he's 30, 31, not ancient.
Yep. Still kind of on a semi-proven deal. It's tough. The Avs have about, according to the folks cap friendly who pay a lot of attention to the NHL cap, the Avs have about $10.4 million in cap space remaining after tackling the Mittelstadt contract. Now, of course, you have to consider both the Valeri Nichushkin situation and the Gabriel Landeskog situation, both guys that make big money. But at the moment, at least, neither of them counts against the cap.
Right.
But you still have Drouin. You still have Sean Walker, who we believe will probably move on because somebody's going to get priced out. But we talked about Joel Kiviranta, Yakov Trenin, Brandon Duhaime, Caleb Jones, Jack Johnson, all of which would
you're
be
not going to be able to
candidates.
keep all of those.
Right.
Guys.
All of which would be candidates to return, but probably all can't return, especially if Drouin takes up, let's say, roughly 4 more of that.
Right.
That's $6 million with 6 more of your own unrestricted free agents. And that's not going shopping for more help. The Avalanche are going to be up against it. Fortunately, they are one of the teams that folks like to come play for the reasons that Sandy elucidated. So
they're going to have to find a bargain similar to Drouin, who's going to be the next Jonathan Drouin.
Yep.
Coming here and playing above and beyond his contract.
That's the challenge when you are up there with the money. We'll talk about the Denver Nuggets, who have similar challenges in front of them, but want to remind you that if you're looking for the perfect place to work, play, and socialize, we'll look no further than the Denver Athletic Club, right in the heart of downtown Denver. You know it, of course. You've heard of it. You had to. It's been around since 1884, one of the first private sport clubs in the country. As a DAC member, you'll enjoy top-notch amenities, also full fitness center, licensed child care center, spa, massage, Pilates, a golf simulator, even more. But what truly sets the DAC apart is that vibrant community. Like I told you, historic community that's been going on for more than a century. They understand how to make this work, and that member-owned club is all about you, offering year-round social events, co-working, dining, and fun for the entire family. The Denver Athletic Club is truly a club for your whole life. And now, for a limited time, new members pay nothing in initiation fees. So join the DAC today. That's the Denver Athletic Club. Of course, you can find them at denverathletic.cc on the internet and check them out right now. That membership, it's never often $0 for new members. Give them a look because it might be a fit for not only you, but your whole family as well. For the Denver Nuggets, talk about things sneaking up here. The NBA draft, Sandy, starts tomorrow. The first round will be tomorrow. The Denver Nuggets obviously don't pick very early in the proceedings tomorrow, but at least they have a pick, so you'll take that. The challenge that they're going to run into has to do with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and we've talked about this before. Now, there are some ways around things for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and for the Denver Nuggets, but it is complicated. One of the things that makes it complicated is he has a player option that he has to make a decision on by Friday. The draft will happen before Caldwell-Pope makes his decision. So you hope that at least some back channels, maybe that decision's already been made. But to get an idea of how challenging it may be to make this work, over at The Athletic, they have a list of free agents. And they're looking at shooting guards. Yeah, it's a pretty important position, right? It's where a lot of the stars that in the NBA play. The top one available in free agency, should he exercise his option to join it, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, with a projected next year salary of $27.5 million. That's a big number. But when you think about it, Bruce Brown got $22 million, and he came off the bench. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a 2-time champion with 2 teams, starters. And yeah, I don't think that number is actually unreasonable at this point, and maybe one of the best one-on-one defenders in the league. So the Nuggets can't afford to let him go because, quite frankly, if they don't, they'll still be over the luxury tax and the aprons. So all they would have, even if they let him go, is the mid-level exception, which means they can only spend $5 million. The problem is Caldwell-Pope's player option is for $15 million, just a little more than half of the Athletic projection.
As an old-timer, as a purist, and I don't think that should necessarily be a term of derision, but boy, it's hard for me to get my arms around that. Caldwell-Pope is a terrific defensive player. He averages 10 points per game. He is 31 years old, and he's going to make, and I agree, somebody will give it to him, $27 million a year.
Yep.
Interesting thing about Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown made more than 20.
Yep, 22
last year.
Yep.
He went to Indiana. Indiana turned out to be a pretty good team. But early in the season, Bruce Brown was not happy there. He was not necessarily playing a lot. They hadn't really come together as a team yet. They weren't doing that well. He ends up getting traded. And, it's the old story that money can't in and of itself make you happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an unhappy year, relatively speaking, for Bruce Brown.
Then he gets dealt to Toronto,
Exactly.
Which team was going nowhere.
From Indiana to Toronto.
Team.
Right. A team that a team for whom he has no future.
Right.
So as a career move, I'm not sure about what Bruce Brown did last year. As a career move, I'm not sure it would be beneficial for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to leave. But from a financial perspective, obviously you can't ignore those realities. And there are bad teams around the league who have a lot of money. And the Nuggets have a history of losing free agents to bad or at best average teams who have a lot of money to spend. Jeremy Grant left for Detroit.
Right.
Detroit wasn't quite as bad as Detroit is now, but they weren't very good. He took the money. Bruce Brown left for more money. And the Nuggets couldn't have paid him even a quarter of what he ended up making. So there's no criticism intended here.
Right.
Now you've got Caldwell-Pope in this situation where I'm guessing the coach, Michael Malone, wants him back.
The defensive-minded
work.
Yeah.
Anything that you have to work to make it happen. From the general manager's perspective, I go back to the press conference that followed the Game 7 loss to Minnesota, in which Calvin Booth, the general manager of the Nuggets, talked very seriously about Christian Brown being promoted to the starting lineup next year if Caldwell-Pope could not be retained. Michael Malone didn't seem nearly as excited about that prospect as Calvin Booth did.
I bet.
So this move, I think, will tell us a lot about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and where his priorities are. And again, he's got 2 rings. He can do whatever he wants. And, it's easy for us to say, well, he should stay here, pick up the option, work out a long-term deal. They have until mid-July, I think, to do that. And, maybe it'd be 4 years and $97 million, according to all the stipulations, which would translate, if you included the $15.4 million deal for this year, into something like 5 years and $112 million. That's not bad. Now, it's not $27 million a year.
No,
but it's not bad.
Because if the assumption is 27 and a half a year, which believe it or not, would, as of today, put Kentavious Caldwell-Pope barely in the top 60 paid players in the NBA.
Isn't that amazing?
But you're talking about the idea of a 4-year deal for that value would bring you to about $110 million. Well, here's what the Nuggets can do, and I think certainly what they hope to do. If Caldwell-Pope opts in, it does mean that he'd only get $15 million this year. That would obviously help the Nuggets. But because they'd have his bird rights, then they could sign him almost immediately to a 4-year extension
for almost $100 million.
Right. So he could get 112 over 5 from the Nuggets, or let's say this number's right, or roughly 110 over 4 from another team. If I'm to guess, I think Caldwell-Pope for that, even though it's an extra year and the annual value is different, but he's still going to end up walking away with roughly the same amount of money. I think he'd stay. The question is,
I agree with you.
Between now and then, is Caldwell-Pope looking at the Nuggets and thinking that they've already peaked? Is Caldwell-Pope looking at the bench and going, we don't have enough? Or is he looking maybe at Michael Malone saying, maybe if we play these young guys, we'll have something? Or does he want to wait for the draft and see if the Nuggets finally go big and let Nikola Jokic have a break by going with someone like Ron Holmes.
That seems to be.
And then if you're Caldwell Pope, you could say, okay.
Biggest objective, it was they don't have a second-round pick. They have one pick in this draft. And last year they had 3, or ended up making 3, right?
Right. But the Nuggets they have the 58th.
Do they?
Yes.
They have a late pick. Okay.
You're not going to expect you won't hit Nikola Jokic again during the Quesarito commercial, so don't count
I
on
stand
that.
corrected.
But yeah,
I stand corrected. They do have 2 picks. Okay, but with the first round pick, you've got to go big.
Absolutely,
you've got to go big.
Despite the fact that both Malone and Booth have kind of indicated they don't particularly care about a backup big man.
Well,
but you know who does? Probably the guy that's
block.
Exhausted.
Well, yeah. What they've said is that shot blocking. Malone has said this. Shot blocking is a luxury when it comes to a backup center. It's a luxury. Remember, they've had a shot blocker or 2 act as a backup center now through the years and kept him very long or played him very much. Now, I don't necessarily include DeAndre Jordan, who was once, in his younger years, a terrific shot blocker and probably is quite a bit less than that now.
Sure.
Although by Nugget standards, he can block a shot or 2 from time to time. The Nuggets have some issues with their bench. The youth, the absence of playing time for the 3 rookies this past year. They're going to have to decide. And the Caldwell Pope thing has ramifications whether he stays or goes. One of those ramifications is, and I agree with your scenario, that even though he'd be taking less than $27 million per year, it would make sense for him to sign a 5-year deal for well over $100. What would amount to a 5-year deal for well over $100?
It's guaranteed money. Guaranteed money.
Here's the deal. You're talking about a 31-year-old who 3 years into that deal will be 34.
Right.
4 years. You'll be paying him for at least a year at a value that far exceeds what he is capable of contributing.
But it's probably the only way to get him back. And pardon me, I said they had the Nuggets at the 58th pick. They have the 56th pick, the 26th of the second round. But they do have a first and a second rounder. And maybe that makes a difference, but you're just sort of stuck here. Because if you don't overpay, it depends on what the preference is, right?
You got to overpay. You got to overpay.
You have to overpay because this is your window. And you're not worried about 5 years from now. We've talked about it before. Nikola Jokic at that point may just be retired by then. He might complete his
not worried
contract.
About 5 years from now.
No, coaches don't worry about that.
But the general manager might be.
He might be.
And, you know, the tough thing for the general
manager
manager
don't want your championship
is
team to fall off a cliff.
Okay, but they didn't exactly fall off a cliff.
They most certainly did not. In fact, they had a better regular season.
But here's what complicates things. The general manager, by definition, the job definition, is looking long-term more than the head coach is.
Right.
Here's where it gets tricky. In 24-25, Calvin Booth's contract expires. Michael Malone's contract runs through, I believe, 2027, if I'm not mistaken. So the long-term contract goes to the guy whose job it is to think short-term, win now. And the guy with 1 year left on his deal is in charge of looking at the big picture. What the Nuggets should do, in my humble opinion, I know they've got other issues during this offseason, but there's no salary cap threshold, first apron, second apron for executives.
Right.
If you want to ride with Calvin Booth, if you believe in any way, shape, or form in the vision of Calvin Booth, you've got to sign him.
And I think you need to sign him with
this
the exact
summer.
Same end date that Malone has.
Exactly.
You've got to tie these guys at the hip, so they've got to get on the
You
same
don't have
page.
to pay him the same.
No.
But their contract should run concurrently.
I agree. I think that's absolutely critical. Obviously, in that second apron for the Nuggets, things get very, very difficult. And if they don't find a way to get this done, it will be very, very complicated. So Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has a extraordinary say in what the Denver Nuggets will be, how easy it will be to try to get back to being a contending team. Because we pointed out, if Caldwell Pope decides to just leave, if he decides I just like the average 27 million a year and I'd like 4 years at 110 instead of 5 at 112, the Nuggets only have a 5.2 million exception to replace him, and he is a starter. Remember, Caldwell Pope at 27.5 million would be the 60th highest paid player in the league. 5.2 million, that gets you the Vlatko Čančars of the world, who the Nuggets decided to move on from after his injury, and maybe they re-sign him later. We'll see. But you do not get much out of that. And what that basically would mean is that you hope to find a veteran like a DeAndre Jordan who wants to make one last run, and then whoever you draft in this year's draft has to contribute. So now the youth, if Christian Brown had to step up and take over the number 2 guard spot, if KCP leaves, now your top guy off the bench is presumably Watson, but then again, he vanished in the Minnesota series. So presumably Peyton Watson, but do you try to retain Justin Holiday? He's going to take much of that 5.2 million. Reggie Jackson opted in at his 5+ million. So there's not a lot there either. So you'd have to deal with Julian Strawther, who I guess would have to make a leap to be your 7th man, or at least maybe it's who you pick 26th overall, but their 26th overall pick has to step in and play immediately. Strawther was picked higher than that, and he couldn't crack the lineup for any significant stretch of time. So for the Nuggets, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's choice might be a reason for you to believe the Nuggets can get back to the top of the mountain, or it might be the reason you realize that window may have just slammed entirely closed.
We've talked before we break here briefly. We've talked about the Avalanche and we've talked about the Nuggets so far.
Mm-hmm.
The odds came out following the Stanley Cup final last night. Scintillating Game 7.
Oh, my. Yeah.
Odds for next year. Avs are in the top 5 at 12-1. Whose chances are better of winning a championship next year? I think it's very close. But you think the Avalanche over the Nuggets?
Yes.
I do too. Yep. I agree with you.
I think that's where we stand. Well, we know doesn't have a very good chance of winning the championship this year, next year, or anything until they get a plan. That would be the Colorado Rockies. We'll talk about them in a moment, but want to remind you that with warmer weather here, and it is warm, it's definitely time to get outside and have some fun with family and friends. And sure, you want to entertain everyone at the house, but sometimes you need a break from the kitchen, and that's when you can use Rolling Smoke Barbecue. You've heard us talk about it here on the program, whether you have a half dozen folks or even 50 or more, or maybe you just want to feed the family. Pick up the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 locations. Easy to find. They're in Aurora, inside the Stanley Marketplace. That's where it all took off. Just follow your nose when you walk in there. You'll find it. In Golden, inside the Golden Mill, at the corner of Dry Creek and University in Centennial. That's where I go when I'm craving some barbecue, closest to the Mile High Sports Studios right here. And now the newest location, open on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. And if you're thinking, well, I was just going to try it out, but I haven't had a chance to go to one of those locations, maybe you're going to a concert at Red Rocks. Well, you can try Rolling Smoke there too. So skip the hot dogs, skip the nachos, go get yourself some top quality barbecue, fill your stomach. Go ahead and you'll enjoy the show more when you got a little good food in your belly. So check them out at Red Rocks. And then when you find them there, you'll want to come back and hit up one of those 4 locations that I mentioned. Easy to find, easy to get to, and easy to order. You can do it online. Rolling Smoke Barbecue online at rollingSmokeBBQ.com. Sandy, the Colorado Rockies in their longest, we talked about this before, the longest homestand of the season, 10 games. It wasn't make or break because the Rockies already broke their season with an abysmal April. But were they to come out of this homestand with a 500 record or better, they could again extend this stretch of roughly 500 play and start building on the idea that, okay, maybe we're building something here. Instead, they went 3-7, losing 2 of 3 to the Washington Nationals. The only one they won was the nightmare scenario for a lot of the traditionalists, the game against Washington, where with the game tied at the bottom of the 9th and a full count, pitch clock violation ends up causing the game-ending walk. And
first time that's happened.
First time ever. First time that's happened. Pitch clock violation ends up leading to a win for the Rockies. and that was only their third of that
Yes.
homestand. 3-7 in the longest homestand of the season. The Rockies are now tied with the Marlins at 27-51 for the worst record in the National League. And if you're looking for something that delineates, you like maybe looking at run differential, because if I'm looking at teams that are similar, I look at run differential.
Their run differential is similar too.
It's similar. It sure is. But you know what?
Similar as in identical.
Yep. Minus 124 for each of them. So that is bad news. The Rockies are toast. They are 9.5 games
And
out.
even as you point out, and I want to underline this point, even if they've gone 7-3 instead of 3-7 on this homestand, they're still out of contention.
No, but they're 9.5 games away from getting out of last place in the NL West. I mean, they are buried in last. It's not moving. 12.5 games out of the wild card. The question being, even the Rockies themselves, who are capable of self-delusion on an extraordinary scale, have to take a look at this and realize that when you're looking at teams that are worse in Major League Baseball, you'll have a chance to face one of them in a couple days in the Chicago White Sox.
The only team.
That's the only one. So even the Rockies, after going 3-7 on their last homestand, they're now the second worst team in baseball and the worst team in the National League, tied with the Marlins. At a certain point, you have to wonder, is this going to shake anything loose at Coors Field, knowing that they have tradable assets in an effort to rebuild faster? Elias Diaz is in demand around the league. The Cubs in particular have wanted him for about a month because they believe he can be the difference between making a wild card and not.
And the Cubs are only 3 games out of a wild card.
Right. And they desperately need a backstop, and they look at it and think, okay, we'll trade you some mid-range prospects because we think we can make the playoffs.
Well, the Cubs are in last place right now. And again, it's a crowded
their last place
field.
is 5 games under 500, not 24 under 500.
Listen, yes, they're in last place. They're all of 4 games out of second.
Right.
It's not like the Rockies, who are 9.5 games out of 4.
Yeah. Everybody but the Marlins and the Rockies are in it still.
Right.
Everybody in the NL.
Right. Everybody is. So you've got a lot of potential buyers. And for every buyer, there has to be a seller.
Mm-hmm.
If the Rockies were any other baseball team, they'd unquestionably be selling. They'd be moving Cal Quantrill. They'd be moving Ryan McMahon. They'd be moving Diaz, as you mentioned.
Right.
The only untouchable, the only guy you absolutely can't move is a guy who, when ESPN put together a mid-season report card and projected some of the individual award winners, believe it or not, Ezekiel Tovar was 10th in the MVP sweepstakes in the National League.
On a last place team.
With a 2.7 WAR,
a
playing shortstop with great numbers, 12 homers, 36 RBIs, 285 average, 315 on-base percentage, 483 slugging percentage. That works out to an OPS of 798. You're an all-star if you're in that 798, 800 range. You're a potential Hall of Famer if you're in the 900 range. He can get there. I believe. I think he has the talent to get there. And the only blemish with Tovar is the number of walks, only 13, and the number of strikeouts, 92. He's on pace to strike out even more than he did last year, but he is a much improved offensive player. He is a dangerous bat in a lineup not exactly filled with dangerous bats.
Unquestionably. How about
so he's the untouchable.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, you got to trade Quantrill.
Yes.
And you've got to trade McMahon if you're a serious baseball team. I'm not saying serious about contending, because the Rockies aren't contending.
But are you serious about
anytime soon?
Being relevant?
Yes, and serious about running a baseball operation that any fan could look at, from the most casual to the most knowledgeable, and say, okay, they seem to understand the position they're in. And this is what you do. This is what Miami does. This is what the White Sox do. This is what the Angels have been doing for a few years. You trade anybody who can bring any number of prospects back in exchange. That's what you do. The Rockies, contrary to popular belief, do not have a strong farm system. They need prospects. They need an influx,
especially pitching,
particularly pitching.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Tovar, you bring that up. I mean, you look at all these advanced metrics, and that's great. Let's just go to an old school one. Hits. 91 on the season.
Not far from a 200 hit pace.
Right. He's on a pace for 191. 191 hits last year would have put you third in all of baseball.
Yeah.
Right now, he's tied for eighth in all of baseball.
Well, and, knock on.
Yeah. Health permitting.
Right. And he seems to be a durable guy. He's athletic. No history at any point in his past of being injury prone or having sustained a serious injury. So I think he's one of those cornerstone guys.
Rockies love the idea that we need fan favorites, right?
He's the only one. Brendan Rodgers is tradable.
Yeah.
McMahon we've mentioned. Diaz we've mentioned.
And you know what?
Contra,
if someone for some reason is interested in a Brenton Doyle,
yes,
you shouldn't hang up the phone. Maybe someone needs a situational base runner and a center fielder.
Not untouchable.
Right.
Nolan Jones, certainly.
Yeah, you have to listen.
Nolan Jones seems to be warming up now a little bit. His numbers are still awful, but he's warmed up.
But if someone blows you away with a deal,
all of those guys.
And that's where I look at the way the Rockies think, right? Because we think about the fan favorites that they hate trading. Look, Elias Diaz has been around for not all that long, right? And he's a catcher. I don't know if Elias Diaz is a fan favorite. The Rockies, to my mind, if you're even going to say fan favorite, they have one. It's Charlie Blackmon.
Yeah.
If you want to say that Ryan McMahon's on it simply because he's been on the team long enough.
Who on the team was around when they were in the playoffs in 17 and 18? Charlie Blackmon.
Like, that's it. And
so
he's not going anywhere because at this point, nobody's going to trade for Charlie Blackmon. No. But the Rockies need to pivot here because they look at someone like a Quantrill, who, by the way, you just got. He's not a fan favorite. You just got him. Diaz hasn't been here all that long, and he's not going to be here all that long because he's on the wrong side of 30. McMahon isn't a fan favorite. Fans don't stand up and cheer or sing his walk-up song or anything like that. When McMahon's, it's not any slight at McMahon, but the Rockies seem to try to find excuses as to why they won't trade these players. Right. And the argument is, well, they bring people through the doors. Look, Ryan McMahon is not bringing people through the doors. Are they familiar with him? Yes. Broncos fans are familiar with Garrett Bowles. Nobody's buying tickets to go see Garrett Bowles. Familiarity, because you've been on a team for a long time, doesn't mean they're a favorite. And I don't think anyone's thinking against Ryan McMahon, and he is one of their best players on a team that's rather bereft of experienced players. But at the same time, you want to worry about fan favorites? Here's what you do. Let me explain the easy way to do it. You start advertising and building the franchise around Tovar. Your commercials need to be about Tovar.
No, I've seen the commercials.
Your marketing needs to be about Tovar. That's your fan favorite. He's going to be your fan favorite now, and he's going to be your fan favorite in the future. And he's a guy you're not letting go for baseball reasons. For the Rockies, this has to be the canary in the coal mine. This team is plummeting. They had a blip there where it was going to be okay. Now they go on to play the Astros on the road and then the White Sox.
And the Astros are hot.
Right. And maybe you end up in a way where you look at it because the White Sox are abysmal and you can look at it and fool yourself. But here's the thing. You're going to go on the road. They're not going to sweep the White Sox. I don't care about the White Sox. They're not going to do it. And we'll have to see if there's any pressure point in which the Rockies can look at their organization fairly and say that we need to be better in the longer term, because the short term is done. The die's cast. Your last window to try to make any noise just closed, and you won 3 out of 10 games at home. And I get it that the Dodgers came in for 4, but the other 2 teams were teams you could have at bare minimum split with. They lost every one of those series at home. So it seems like every year we're stuck saying this, like, when will they finally get it through their heads? And maybe it only has to do with attendance. And maybe this disastrous homestand lets people look at it and say, okay, they're bad. They're not going anywhere. I don't care. On to 2025.
The problem with attendance is that there is still a fairly high floor for attendance here, because fans of opposing teams like to watch their clubs and they come in here. They want to watch their teams.
Ownership has 2 huge advantages. One, I've mentioned this before. They're better at real estate than they are at baseball by a lot.
They're very good at real estate.
The Coors Field experience is excellent.
Yep.
It's the third oldest stadium in the National League, believe it or not. Coors Field is the third oldest. Only Wrigley and Dodger Stadium are older. That sounds insane, but it's true. It also feels like one of the newest and nicest. That's to their credit. The other advantage is you're selling Colorado. 300 days a year of sunshine. You're selling sunshine. In Colorado, that's a good business to be in, and they've taken advantage of that. So maybe even attendance doesn't break it. It is fascinating to see.
You know what I thought? I thought 100 losses would affect attendance, and it has.
Mm-hmm. It has.
Certainly among Rockies fans,
Mm-hmm.
such as they are.
Mm-hmm.
I thought 100 losses might even change their behavior, and I was dead wrong. It hasn't changed their behavior one iota. Now, maybe they will trade some of these guys we've talked about. Maybe they'll surprise us. But there's no indication that the icons of inaction will do anything different this year than they've done in the past. They made a handful of minor deals last year at the deadline, nothing significant. Heck, the big move that they're possibly, and I say possibly going to make, is getting out from under Chris Bryant's deal somehow at some point. Will they do anything more serious than that? Will they trade any of these people? With any other team in their situation, this homestand would have been a backbreaker. And lose 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
You play 3 teams, 2 of them are mediocre. One's the Dodgers, and the Dodgers weren't even playing that well. Came in here and took 3 out of 4. And the Dodgers aren't playing great. By National League standards, they are, because there aren't that many winning teams in the National League, and they're 8.5 games in front of San Diego in first place in the National League West, but they aren't that great. And the decision would have been made as we head into summer now that within the next month, 5 weeks prior to the trading deadline, this homestand was make or break. We're going to move people. We're going to move anything that isn't nailed down.
Right.
And the only player who's nailed down here is Ezekiel Tovar.
You talk
That's
about
it.
Attendance. Since the COVID year, of course, 2020, where you couldn't have attendance, the Rockies' home attendance in 2021 was 7th in all of baseball. 2022, it was 9th. 2023, it was 14th. 2024, thus far, it's 16th. The Rockies, who regularly sit in the top 10 throughout their
middle of baseball,
but they've always been in the top third.
Yeah,
I
understand. It is dropping,
showing
that fans
the jig
are
might
discerning.
be up. It might be up. And the Rockies, you want to make yourself interesting. Maybe you start making some trades.
Yeah.
Maybe you start building something, because what you're doing isn't working, and it's dropping you in the standings, and it's dropping you in attendance. You don't even have a television contract. What else is left to drop? That's it.
Yeah.
Do something. That's all I think Rockies fans ask. Do something. Whatever that is would be better than watching the team just so slowly sink like a stone further and further and further. Well, that didn't happen for the Florida Panthers, because after the Florida Panthers had a 3-0 lead, they lost the next 3 to Edmonton. They got to come home. That's advantageous, but they lost all their momentum, but they got their heads in the right place. And if you want to get your head in the right place, well, you know who to call.
Well, Rick Perea has worked in the state of Florida before, spent several years with the Miami Dolphins. The Florida Panthers gave him a call, because Rick Perea used to live in that Sunrise area, suburb of Fort Lauderdale.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup. And we're happy that Rick Perea is back here and doing a weekly show with us on Wednesdays, the Rick Perea podcast, Wellness Wednesdays. Your checkup from the neck up comes at 5:30 every Wednesday on Mile High Sports Radio. So we look forward to that every week. He's worked with the world champion Broncos back in 2015, worked with the Rockies as they were preparing for a 2-year run to the playoffs in 17 and 18. He has also worked with the 2023 NBA champion Denver Nuggets, and he can work with you, whether you're a corporate executive, whether you're a middle high school adolescent who is looking for some help, whether you're a worker in any walk of life. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call Dr. P at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933, or look him up at Dr. P at think1foryou, number 4.org. That's think1foryou.org.
In a series that has to be almost a custom designed, is the best possible advertisement for the NHL and NHL hockey. The Florida Panthers end up claiming the Stanley Cup first time in their 30 seasons. They win it on home ice in a tight 2-1 game in Game 7.
Great game.
Yeah, after taking the first 3 games, then Edmonton with the best player on the planet, Connor McDavid, roars back, brings this game, and you have a phenomenal Game 7. Sergei Bobrovsky, the goaltender for Florida, who had been so much a part of their success, 23 for 24 in Game 7, a lot of them of the, as they say, high danger variety.
Yeah, yes, they were high danger opportunities. There weren't a lot of shots.
No.
He was not part of any kind of siege coming from the Edmonton side. Florida reverted to its winning style, finally found its game in game number 7 again after having had it in the first 3 games. I'll tell you all you need to know about the Florida Panthers, though. The Stanley Cup playoffs, at least through Game 3 of the Stanley Cup final, they gave up no 5-on-5 goals to Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, who didn't score any goals in the series,
Right.
Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Hyman didn't score a goal, 5-on-5. First 3 games of the earlier in the playoffs, they had held Panarin without a 5-on-5 goal. Kreider of the Rangers also without a 5-on-5 goal. Zibanejad of the Rangers without a 5-on-5 goal. Pasternak of the Bruins, one of the elite point producers in the NHL year after year, no goals, 5-on-5. And Kucherov, who the last time I looked scored goals with great frequency. He didn't have any 5-on-5 goals against Florida. That's the kind of Florida team we saw last night. And a little bit in the 6th game in the sense that they held McDavid without a shot and Draisaitl, of course, without a goal. Same thing last night, although McDavid had 2 or 3 pretty good scoring chances. No points for Connor McDavid. Tell you how good Connor McDavid was, though, in games 1 through 5, even though the first 3 games he didn't score a 5-on-5 goal. He was named the MVP, the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. Now, it's different in hockey. It's for the entire playoffs.
Right.
And he definitely deserved it.
Oh, yeah.
It isn't,
got
it
some
isn't,
numbers for that.
It isn't for just the Stanley Cup final. In the NBA, you have the NBA Finals MVP. That's just for the finals. The NHL is for the entire playoffs, and he richly deserved it. And you can certainly make as strong an argument as you could make for anybody. And it's actually happened 5 times before.
Right.
That a team that lost in the Stanley Cup final still had the Conn Smythe winner as the MVP of the entire playoffs. It does happen. I remember a year, I don't think he won the Conn Smythe, but Peter Forsberg, even after the Avalanche lost at Dallas in the conference final, was a leading point producer in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That's how good he was. So it happens that way. But Bobrovsky was great last night, and boy, did their big guns show up. Reinhart, Verhaeghe, you had Tkachuk play well.
Yep.
And again, I go back to the difference. Edmonton had 4 guys who played massive minutes. Nugent-Hopkins, McDavid, who played roughly half of the third period, about 3.5 of the last 4 minutes he was on the ice. He was just exhausted at the end. Hyman played almost 25 minutes. And Draisaitl, 22. Beyond that, they had no forward who played more than 13 minutes, 50 seconds in the game. That's the difference. And you look over on the other side, first line, Verhaeghe, Burkhoff, and Reinhardt, 1923, 2021, 2142. Second line, Rodriguez, 1609, Bennett, 1750, Kachuk, 1533. You get the idea. Third line, same thing. 1721, 1439, 1428 for Florida. For Edmonton, 1240, 1155, 1208. And in the fourth line, nobody played last night. It was a three-line game on both sides. But you see how much pressure Edmonton put on four forwards.
Right.
And there were, I think, at least 7, maybe twice that many, who played well and made serious contributions. I mean, the third line center, Lindell, had a point, had an assist, and played more than 14 minutes.
He was
very good.
Lundell was their leading assist
Very
man
good.
in the Stanley Cup Finals with
Very
5.
good. He was very good.
Only one forward, Reinhardt,
Yeah.
in the 7-game series, averaged more than 20 minutes a game, and
Right.
he didn't even average 21.
They were
20,
the fresher
58.
They're the fresher team.
Lundell, 5 assists in 7 games, leads the team. He averaged in the 7 games 15 minutes and 14 seconds. Their leading goal scorer, by the way, no player, you're talking about depth, only one player on Florida even had more than 2 goals in the 7-game series.
Right.
One. That person led the team in points with 7 and led the team in plus minus with 6. That was former Avalanche Evan Rodriguez,
Who was terrific.
who played an average
1
in the
through
7
7,
games.
he might have been their best.
He might have been in 15:01 on average on ice. And that was their guide. Best in plus minus, most goals, most points.
And enjoys the distinction of being the only man whose name will appear on the Stanley Cup as Evan. Never
Really?
been an Evan.
Huh.
On all the teams who have won Stanley Cups, there's never been an Evan, but there is now. Evan Rodriguez, the former Avalanche. Forward.
That's an interesting little out of all of that, huh?
Out of all.
Not one.
Not
okay. How about
Not
that?
one
Well, you know what?
player named Evan.
The funny thing
But
is,
there
we were
is
going to
one.
have it either way because Evan Bouchard for the
There you
Oilers
go.
would have won it.
There was going to be an Evan.
There was going to be an Evan.
this
It ends
year.
up being old Fred Evan Rodriguez. But congratulations to the Florida Panthers, first time in
They
their
were great.
history.
They were great. And
What a story to have
you know,
it just be, the Oilers fight all the way back and then have such a terrific Game 7. And I think when you look at the numbers that Rodriguez has, it just makes it obvious why the Conn Smythe had to go to McDavid. And a teeny tiny bit of controversy that I think you and I can address and throw away immediately. He did
we like those kind.
Yeah. Connor McDavid didn't come out and accept the Conn Smythe trophy in person because he's
Of course not.
He's in the locker room with his team as they just lost Game 7.
He spoke to the media.
Right.
Yeah, well,
You don't walk
You
out
don't
and
walk
wait,
out.
take your trophy and then bring it back in as you've just lost Game 7.
Of course not.
There's nothing about that. It's not unusual. It's only unusual because a player on the losing team doesn't usually
Not
win.
usually,
the Conn
but
Smythe.
he was the 6th to do it, so it's happened. And I don't remember anybody else on a losing team going out on the ice. Now they have a different kind of celebration now than they used to have for the Stanley Cup champion. But especially now when it's all on the ice and the players are out there and they're throwing the rats onto the ice and stuff. You think he's going to go out in the middle of that to take an individual award? Hey, I'll tell you something. I'm not sure Connor McDavid will ever win a Stanley Cup. And that's a shame. And it says next to nothing. Well, I'll say nothing. I won't even qualify it by saying next to nothing. It says nothing about Connor McDavid's brilliance as a hockey player.
McDavid with 42 points. That's the 4th most in any postseason.
And he set the assist record.
Yeah. Wayne Gretzky had 47 points in 85. Mario Lemieux had 44 in 91. Wayne Gretzky had 43 in 88. And then 42 for McDavid in this playoffs. The only 2 people he trails ever in a playoff run are Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux.
Without Connor McDavid, they get swept.
Yes.
They get
Unquestioned. They almost got swept with Connor McDavid.
Well,
and he was tremendous.
Yeah. And the fourth game was 8-1. So maybe I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
But that series, there's no way that series goes beyond maybe 5 games without.
But 34 assists in 24 games, breaking Wayne Gretzky's record for assists. Gretzky had the 31 in 88. Breaks the assist record. We just had Milan Hajduk in here a little bit ago, who led the entire NHL playoffs in assists.
The year the Avs won the Cup, he had 16.
Right. And McDavid had more than twice that.
Yeah, it's just
these are comic book numbers.
He is on a different level. We love Nathan MacKinnon, and we think Nathan MacKinnon this past year, because McDavid was injured at times and didn't play.
Does he deserve the heart? I've been saying, though, I'm not sure he's going to get it. We'll see.
That's a regular season award.
I know.
It's playoffs have nothing to do with it, and the voting takes place before the playoffs begin, so there's no influence there.
Except McDavid still led the league in. I mean, you're talking about the numbers in which he had it. I don't know. We'll see. He
didn't lead the league, though.
No,
he didn't lead the league, and he didn't lead the league because he didn't play as many games. And that's part of it. That's part of it. And again, it's a regular season.
He was tied at the top of
assists. We think MacKinnon ought to get it this year. McDavid's won that award many times. We also think that McDavid was certainly deserving of the Conn Smythe trophy.
And there's no question he's the best player in hockey,
and they, it's 1-1 in the second period, less than 5 minutes to go in the second period. Edmonton comes within inches of scoring. And all of a sudden, the puck is going the other way. Reinhart's got it, and the defense pairing for the Oilers makes a big mistake and backs into the goaltender, giving Reinhart all kinds of. Well, Reinhart was looking to pass, but they just kept backing up, and he had time to pick his spot, and it was a little bit of a softie on Skinner, a short side goal, which you cannot give up in that situation, but he didn't get any help from his defenseman either on that play. That's the difference in the game. That was, and I think most people watching, including the guys doing the broadcast, Sean McDonough and Ferraro, right? They sensed it too. They sensed that might be a keeper. That might be the cup winner right there.
The congratulations go to, by the way, today the Hockey Hall of Fame class is also announced in the builders category. Colin Campbell and David Poillet added there. And then 2 former former Olympians, Natalie Darwitz, Chrissy Wendell-Pohl, and then 3 NHL players, all obvious inductees, Pavel Datsyuk and Shea Weber, both in their first year of eligibility, and Jeremy Redick, who at one point the leading American scorer in history, kind of a no-brainer there as well.
Jeremy Redick certainly is a player. Always,
I have to be honest.
Favorites.
I saw the announcement. I was like, wait, he wasn't in already?
Yeah,
that was one of those moments. I'm like, hold on.
But you know why he's famous to me? The term Messiah was attached to Ray Bourque, not by any talk show hosts in this market, although a couple of us adopted it as a term of endearment. It was actually coined by Jeremy Redick, who was being sarcastic after a playoff game in the late 1990s that involved, in a key situation, a possible Bourque penalty. And Redick was asked about it after the game, and his response was, "Oh, that's the Messiah there. They're not going to call anything on him." So forevermore, in the minds of a few of us, Ray Bourque was referred to as the Messiah.
Redick, in his obviously memorable run with the Blackhawks, 88-96, 595 points in 524
fantastic players, and also had that great exchange with Patrick Waugh.
Of course.
Remember, in the 96 playoffs, and this is a tough series. Maybe the toughest series the Avalanche had was not against Detroit, but was against the Chicago Blackhawks in the second round. And Redick scored on Patrick Waugh and talked about faking him into the rafters and something about his jockstrap. And
then you got
the rafters and everything. And you got the great response, which I think, for the sake of accuracy, was actually suggested to Patrick Waugh by Adam Foote, his roommate. I'm having trouble hearing Jeremy with my 2 Stanley Cup rings plugged in my ears. That was one of the great responses.
All-timers. But Redick absolutely belongs in the Hall of Fame. He's actually been eligible since 2012. Congratulations to all 7 members of that class. As we mentioned, by the way, the NHL draft will be up on Friday. We'll have a chance to talk about that as the week goes along. But want to remind you before we head back to the NBA that the Colorado Whiskey Fest 4th annual, by the way, coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. So coming up pretty quick. Food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors will be on site, including more than 50 different whiskey vendors. The festival takes place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. and features live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter. They both played last year. They were terrific. They made sure they had them back again. Tickets are available online, and if you use promo code MHS for, Mile High Sports, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. So if you're 21 and up, get your tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. And while you're there, use that promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets for the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest at the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. The Los Angeles Lakers, who thrive to a certain extent on attention. They need it like oxygen as a franchise. Throughout their history, they've been pretty successful at doing it. But as of late, they get a little bit more out of the ESPN world than they deserve on the court. Obviously, the Denver Nuggets have had no problem dispatching it. I don't know what will happen with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and I actually quite like both the game and the analysis that we saw from their new head coach to an extent with JJ Redick. But JJ Redick announced as the coach of the Los Angeles Lakers in sort of a bizarre introductory press conference, drops an F-bomb in response to a question saying, I don't care about your question. Points out that he, after being involved,
former member of the media attacking the media.
Right. And I mean, former as in last week. Member of the media, like a week ago. JJ Redick has never coached a little league team. This is the first anything ever. And Redick also talked about how it was, he felt he learned a lot being in the, quote, engagement farming industry. And what he meant by that was trying to get attention for his podcast that ran for 3 months with LeBron James as his co-host. That might have been helpful. Obviously, none of this happens if Dan Hurley doesn't sign the monumental offer. He
was not the Lakers
that the Lakers get, but then they end up going back to, and we'll get to what Rob Pelinka said LeBron James' influence was in a moment. But let's be very simple. LeBron James at one point in his career was actually considered for a superstar caliber player to be somewhat coachable. Michael Malone talked about enjoying coaching LeBron James when he was younger, when he was on the Cavs staff. Not anymore. LeBron James is an entity unto himself within the NBA, and the Los Angeles Lakers basically exist to whatever LeBron James wants and they can possibly do. Rob Pelinka, the former agent, who was then promoted to general manager, then brings in ostensibly JJ Redick, the former analyst and erstwhile briefly podcast host, as the new head coach at the age of 40. And James has his fingerprints on both of these. Again, Redick and James co-hosted the podcast that was engagement farming, according to Redick himself, that gets him the job. Okay, and maybe that'll work. Obviously, he's a guy that looks a lot into analytics. He's looking at the game from a different angle. But LeBron James probably doesn't bring JJ Redick in and said, all right, coach me real hard and tell me what I should be doing that I haven't been doing in my 20-plus year career. At this point, LeBron James coaches LeBron James. But to believe the Lakers and to believe Redick, he's there to alter the way LeBron James plays in his autumn years as a player, using him as a hub, using him as a lot of different ways in order to extend the career. I don't buy it a bit. He's there because LeBron James is comfortable to be there. Everyone in the league knows that in the draft that starts tomorrow, the first round, not the second round where Bronny James is going to be drafted, everyone in the league knows that in the second round, the Lakers are going to pick Bronny James.
Pick out 3, in my view, and maybe I'm missing somebody, who were player coaches back in an era long past where they actually, for various reasons, had players coach teams they were also playing for.
Right.
Bill Russell's the most famous, although probably out of the three, the worst coach, the three guys I'm thinking of, but he was coaching Bill Russell, which was a big advantage. And the only guy who could have coached Bill Russell, other than Red Auerbach, who had retired, was Bill Russell. In fact, Red Auerbach had Tommy Heinsohn in mind to succeed him. Tommy Heinsohn eventually did become the head coach of the Celtics after Russell retired from both playing and obviously coaching. Tommy Heinsohn told Red Auerbach, "Could do that. There's one guy who can coach Russell other than you, and that's Russell." Russell never pretended, in all honesty, to be the greatest coach in the world. In fact, you could look at 2 of his 3 years, in which even they won championships, and I think he was that great a coach. He forgot about stuff, and really Sam Jones was as much of a coach as Russell was. But I'm thinking of Russell. I'm thinking of Dave DeBusschere, coach of a very bad Detroit team in very young years in his NBA career. Very young player. And Lenny Wilkins, who for a time was a player coach and, of course, became later just a coach and a very good one at that. I think of those 3 guys, and I say LeBron James is as much of a player coach as any of those 3 ever were. In a practical sense.
Yes. Pelinka's quote was that LeBron James, and I quote, chose not to be heavily involved.
Mm-hmm.
I'm impressed with the ability to say that with a straight face. When in a few days they're going to draft his son.
Yeah.
Who was.
But it'll have had nothing to do with that either.
Nothing to do with that either. They will have evaluated that, even though, remember where the Lakers pick, by the way, that even though he would basically be considered undraftable by most teams, the Lakers are going to walk away with LeBron James' son, the coach's LeBron James podcast co-host. And that's why, at least for looking at the next few years, probably the last years of LeBron James' career, the Denver Nuggets, and I can't believe I'm saying this, to my mind, simply do not have to worry about the Los Angeles Lakers, who I think have gone so far afield about this is how we win championships by just doing this is what LeBron James says, that I don't think they're a threat for anything. In fact, I think they're going to be very hard pressed to make the
Lakers
next year. They may win the NCAA
year
tournament
after year,
but
are in partnership effectively with ESPN. They take ESPN employees and make them coaches, as they've done with JJ Redick. They work on a promotional basis. That's all ESPN ever talks about. And especially now with this appointment, which is, to me, not even close to being one of the big stories of the NBA offseason. I mean, it would have been a big story if Danny Hurley had taken the job. That one, 2-time national championship coach, and he leaves the pristine campus in Storrs, Connecticut, and takes on the Laker job that Mike Krzyzewski, former Duke coach, turned down some multiple years ago, and probably more than once, but certainly 20 years ago, well publicized. Hurley taking the job would have been major news. Redick, to me, I don't take him seriously as a coach. I didn't take him that seriously as a commentator when he talked about players like Jerry West out of the 1960s being plumbers, couldn't play today. Would have been interesting had West been allowed. I know his later years were filled with rancor toward the Lakers and vice versa.
Right.
And that was a shame. And it was all the Lakers' fault, completely the Lakers' fault. And I understand West could be difficult, but that was all. Lakers could have repaired that anytime they wanted to, and they didn't really want to. But had somehow Jerry West still been involved with the Lakers, I promise you, JJ Redick would not have been hired. They'd have hired anybody except JJ Redick, and I'm not even sure JJ Redick was their second choice. But
he was
given
LeBron
their
James'
partnership with ESPN and their status as an organization with LeBron James being the chief decision maker. It was the only hire. Once Hurley turned them down, it was the only hire they were going to make. And JJ Redick will do nothing that will extend the career of LeBron James. LeBron James will make the choice on whether he wants to extend his career.
And Redick's the one that was addressed about.
Redick will have nothing to do with it. Redick was hired because he'll leave LeBron James alone.
The only thing he addressed was that he said that he spoke to Anthony Davis about being who they'd run the offense through, and he wanted LeBron James to shoot more threes.
LeBron James doesn't shoot threes real well.
If I'm the best ever of his career, 41%. But like I said, if I'm the Denver Nuggets right now,
historically,
I'm worried about Minnesota. I'm worried about Dallas. I'm worried about the Thunder. I'm worried about a whole bunch of teams.
Heck, I'm worried about.
But you know what?
I'm more worried about New Orleans and maybe even the Clippers.
Maybe even the Rockets.
Yeah.
The Nuggets are going to remain the Lakers' daddy, to coin the phrase, because the
Lakers going to have a lot of daddies.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them. And I think even making the play-in is going to be tough. And that even includes their partnership with the four-letter network that seems to remember that that's the only team left in the NBA. Although they have seemed to come back to Boston a little bit. So we'll see how that.
They like the coastal teams.
Yeah. So who knows? But obviously, it will be interesting to see how that shakes out. But if you're the Nuggets, enjoying at least your renaissance of revenge for the entire 1980s over the Lakers, at least that part, one way or the other, is likely to continue. It's been a lot of fun getting to talk about all these things. Such a terrific Stanley Cup final and a great week of hockey coming up. Of course, Casey Mittelstadt re-signed by the Avs. We'll find out what happens with Jonathan Drouin, perhaps before the draft. That will happen later this week, as well as the NHL awards. The NBA draft is tomorrow. The Denver Nuggets, of course, have a late first-round pick in that. We'll take a look at that tomorrow as well. Danny Bailey is the man that makes everything work, the director of the program, the EP, the grand poobah here of everything that you see on this program. Always appreciate everything that Danny does. We appreciate you as well. However, you get a chance, whether you watch the program live on YouTube, whether you're catching it at another time, whether it's on demand that you like. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's right down there below. Just go and hit that red button. It'll let you know when we're up next, what we're talking about next, and when we go live. We'll be back at it tomorrow, but we have to step away for now. For Danny Bailey, behind the camera, for Sandy Clough, I'm Shawn Drotar. Thanks for listening to Mile High Sports.